știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. Никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не затрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Весенний ветер веет, каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать.
единый рабочий род, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как ты рабочий, то не жди, что нам поможет другой. Себе мы свободу добудем твою своей рабочей рукой. Марш, первый, два, три, марш, первый, два, три, встать в ряды, товарищ, нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий род, потому что рабочий ты сам. Modern Platz in das ist. Rede ein in der Arbeit, der Arbeitsdruck, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий род, потому что рабочий ты сам. Rede ein in der Arbeit, der Arbeitsdruck, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Sretna pod suncem, rasti u jaslama dječjim, rasti i cvijetaj zemljo ravnih ljudi, i neka mir nad tvojim ljudima vlada, mir tvojim lađama napučini i tvome danu što se vedar budi. Rasti sretna da svi narodi vide, sa strana svih, sa juga i sjevera, kako se rađa i kako se voli, kako se brani zemlja proletera. Rasti, cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti, cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Sreći u vodi i u zraku, u pjesmi strojeva i u sjaju žita. Rasti,
Greetings, everybody, and welcome. It is the evening of the 20th of May, 2025, and you join us today for a live stream which is appropriately titled Question Time, which, of course, is a reference to the absolutely and completely awful British TV program where a series of manifestly inadequate, barely sentient, drooling buffoons from the major bourgeois parties sit through an hour of pre-selected questions from what I can only assume are some of the most reactionary individuals that one can possibly find on the streets of Britain, and pretend to know what they're talking about for a whole hour. It is one of the most absolutely unbearable pieces of crap on British television, and I haven't watched it for years. I will use the title, though, for this program. And as this is a regular feature, and you'll know if you've been a program watcher for some time, it's where I take questions from the chat and from email and on Twitter and look to answer them as best I can. So be sure to throw your questions into the chat and I will work through them. And we will begin in just a moment. So just before we start, things I'm reading and looking at the moment are the Soviet history of the Soviet Party, CPSU, in the period post-Khrushchev up to the Gorbachev era. I'm trying to track the sort of twists and turns of revisionism and the relative strengths of the different factions within the CPSU. Because one of the things that I'm trying to make sense of is how liquidationism, which is what Gorbachev represented, he represents liquidationism, not only came to be in power, but also how they couldn't be challenged adequately, even though they were never a majority of the CPSU. They were always a minority in terms of them being liquidationists. They were never at a point where they had mass support amongst the Soviet proletariat of any of the major parts of the Soviet Union. The only sections where liquidationism took hold en masse were the Baltic states and Armenia to a degree, and Georgia. And that was because the local parties were systematically undermined by the CPSU center headed by Gorbachev. And the appointment of Gorbachev, the more you look into it, looks more and more dubious in terms of the fact that this was a guy who had relatively little experience, wasn't from a particularly successful region, Stavropol is where he came from, hadn't been a particularly successful, in fact, a quite unsuccessful member of the junior member of the Politburo. And yet he was elevated into the most senior position, along with other people who were manifestly inexperienced, such as Edvard Shevardnadze, who had been head of the Georgian party for a number of years, but had absolutely no experience in foreign affairs whatsoever. So you had two men in very, very senior positions in the Soviet state and party who were completely and utterly unprepared and unqualified for those positions. And, well, whether you see them as mendacious actors by design or just incompetent stooges elevated to high office by other forces within the CPSU and the state, by other more shady forces who preferred to operate behind the scenes, the effect of their elevation is undeniable. And given that a strong revolutionary wing did exist in the CPSU, and at the very least a strong element remained in the party that would have been very much opposed to liquidationism. In fact, the majority of the party, even those who were revisionists, were opposed to liquidationism. Even some of the more pro-market forces were opposed to liquidationism. So why is it that the liquidationist line won out everywhere? It's an interesting thing to observe, to analyze. And so I've been doing some reading up on that. I will, of course, do a program on it when I feel that the research has merited doing a specific hour on it, because it's a fascinating thing to look at. And also, the more you dig in to the later history of the USSR, yes, revisionism and very badly implemented pro-market reforms had done severe damage to the CPSU and its ability to maintain itself. They'd done damage to the Soviet proletariat and its ability to mobilize in defense of its own interests. But again, to go from a point where under Andropov and even under Chernenko, the Soviet Party was actively considering the rehabilitation of Stalin, to just a few short years later, the entire history of the CPSU being trashed out in the open by the state's own media operation, that's quite some change. And that points towards some kind of coup, to my mind. That even with the degraded state of certain elements in the party, thanks to revisionism, to go to outright liquidationism within a couple of years points to a more something else going on alongside the rot of revisionism, which was real and had created real problems. So that's what I've been looking at recently. So we'll greet everybody who's in the chat. So we've got David Greenwood from the wrong side of the Pennines. We've got Nehat from Istanbul. We have Bishi from East Anglia, sunny East Anglia, no less. We have, come on and get a thorough analysis of North Korea. So asks Nehat. You may well do, comrade. I will make a note of that. Good evening to the Kulak eradicated Ukro. So good evening to you. Good picture, by the way. Analysis of Cuba, or I think you meant that, or did you mean the movie Cube? One of the either way, interesting subjects. ScoMo, good evening to you. Winston Fahrenheit says, does anyone know where I can find a 21-year-old Ukrainian male model and builder? Maybe I'll ask Starmer. Funny you should mention that. This may be a subject for discussion on the Decline and Fall episode to be recorded tomorrow. Hello to Aldo. Hello to R-Worded Samurai. Hello to Kustrim Shala, who joins us from Vienna, Österreich. Molotov Cocktail says, so last week Starmer said Island of Strangers, and this week he negotiated a deal to bring in more young Europeans. Well, maybe he has a liking for them. We don't know. More seriously, though, yeah, I'm going to be doing a special show on the EU deal probably tomorrow evening. So schedule will probably be, it will probably be, in actual fact, tomorrow evening will be Decline and Fall. Special program on the EU deal will probably be Thursday, and then special interview on Friday for this week. The Friday show will be pre-recorded because I'll be traveling then. So yes, but to answer Molotov Cocktail's point, Starmer's playing the same game as Blair and Brown, and to be fair, to David Cameron as well, which is that all of the stuff you see about immigration from any of these politicians is partly labor disciplining mechanisms, as we've talked about before, but also it's about playing a game, which is that the British capitalist class require access to the single market, which it looks like through this deal they're starting to get, and they require frictionless trade with the EU. They also require the ability to move around the European Union, especially the Eastern European countries, exploiting resources, labor, and markets there, and also having access to a continental-wide labor pool. That's what they've wanted they've wanted to regain that for quite some time, and now it looks like they're going to get that. So there's reasons why Starmer did his big, Enoch Powell style announcement last week. It's because it's to secure himself against what he was going to announce this week, and it was partially a response to the very negative performance of the Labour Party in the recent local government elections here, but it's also to try and get out ahead of a deal that would essentially be another brick in the wall, to quote Pink Floyd, of the rebuilding of the wall against Brexit, or the reversal of Brexit, which is something I've been talking about on this channel since 2019. when I first did the experimental original audio version of this program. The British ruling class never wanted Brexit. In fact, they didn't allow David Cameron his lordship for a good few years because they were that peeved at him for allowing that referendum in the first place. They didn't want it because access to the benefits that the EU brought them was something they didn't want to lose. They also, again, the British ruling class has a very contradictory attitude, and there's different factions in the British ruling class, and they are by no means unified on it. But the dominant faction of them, so like the City of London people, they didn't want to lose access to the single market. They didn't want to lose access to the continent-wide labour pool. And that's something that they very much wanted to reverse. So as soon as the Brexit vote came in, they were talking about overriding it, reversing it. You can't possibly do this, etc., etc. They ended up in a real mess, though, because they had to decide what they valued more: getting rid of Corbyn's milk and water Social Democrats in the Labour Party, or who might have actually done some kind of deal over the EU to reverse Brexit quicker, or did they value did they value getting rid of him more, or getting back into the EU quicker? In the end, they valued getting rid of Corbyn overall as the priority for a variety of reasons, which I've gone into before. So they ended up with Boris Johnson, somebody who, again, the bulk of the ruling class didn't trust, but they thought that they could get rid of him pretty quickly. And in the end, they got rid of him in fairly efficient fashion. He was elected in 2019, brought in, won the election, again, partially thanks to the intervention of the Brexit Party on the side of the Tories that time, just as Labour benefited from the intervention of Reform to drain votes from the Tories last year. And Boris Johnson, of course, was disposed of by the midpoint of 2022. He was gone. So that's only really 3 years that he was in office, and his Brexit deal was so full of holes that they were able to start reversing it. Now I'll go into more regarding what's in this this new deal that Starmer has put his name to. It was the British permanent bureaucracy that negotiated this with the EU permanent bureaucracy. So what it's designed to do, though, and this goes for the actions under Sunak as well. It's also part of the reason why Liz Truss was binned. I mean, the woman was a fool, but she was elected on a very sort of pro-Brexit platform. Would never have worked, but that's what she was elected on the basis of. And so Starmer has put his name to this, and the plan of the ruling class has been to reverse Brexit via bureaucratic maneuvers. They were never going to offer a second referendum. That was always a pipe dream, because there was no guarantee that they would have won it. If anything, it would have enraged large elements of the working class and middle class even more, and they would probably have lost that second referendum to an even greater extent than they lost the first one. But they were determined to get back in and get the benefits back that they had lost after the Brexit decision. And so what they've done is a series of bureaucratic maneuvers to clarify Britain's relationship with the European Union under Sunak and now under Starmer. And so Britain gets edged back towards EU membership bit by bit without any real public debate, signing treaties that almost no fucker in the House of Commons will read and will never be reported upon accurately. That's why I'm trying to read as many of the documents as I possibly can in order to actually give an accurate picture of what has been agreed to here. But the overall aim is to reverse the practical impact of Brexit upon the ruling class. And that's what they are using Starmer to do. That's one of the biggest jobs that he was assigned. And it doesn't matter from the point of view of the British ruling class if that kills the Labour Party stone dead, or if they end up with some Tory Reform Party botched job, or you end up with some sort of hideous mutant coalition of the Labour Party, the Liberals, the SNP, the Greens, and every other god-awful progressive thing out there that will create some sort of horrific mutant coalition of the damned in the election to keep the fascists out, all supported by the TUC and the Trotskyites, of course. Doesn't matter if any of that happens from the point of view of the ruling class, as long as they get what they want. Political parties, to them, political leaders are completely disposable. Farage is disposable. Starmer is disposable. Maybe after the full story of the Ukrainian male models and the fire bombings comes out, he will be disposed of. Who knows? So this is what you have to understand. The objective is what matters to the ruling class. However many political parties and political leaders they burn through to get to that objective is of no relevance to them whatsoever. So if Starmer is politically killed stone dead by this, then it doesn't matter. They've got Wes Streeting, or they've got a Nigel, but I doubt they would allow him to be in charge. They'll bring in somebody a bit more respectable. But this is the point. The aim was to undo Brexit, and Brexit itself was always a utopian proposition under capitalism. British capitalism had gotten to the point of being in the advanced state of imperialist decay. It required EU membership to serve its purposes. The idea that, similar to what Trump is proposing, the idea as favored by some in the working class, or quite a lot of working class people, that you were going to get a revival of manufacturing, that you were going to get a revival of the kind of jobs that disappeared over the last 50 years. That was a pipe dream. British capitalism is just simply too far gone to recreate those. And I'll go into why in the EU special coming up. So yes, the Island of Strangers comment last week, and then a deal to bring in more young European workers. None of these things happen by accidents. This is the same game that Tony Blair used to play all the time 20 years ago, which is making some big, like militant sounding anti-immigration statement one week, singling out a certain selection of migrants to be persecuted as well, at the same time making sure that the capitalist class's need for hyper-exploitable labor is satisfied. Again, as David Blunkett once said, a man who was noted for tub-thumping like anti-migrant statements, there is no upper limit on immigration. It's whatever the ruling class requires. So, and again, this would be the same if Nigel Farage was prime minister. He would be given the demands of the ruling class. So, right, Nigel, make that work. Just the same way that Giorgia Meloni was given the demands of the Italian ruling class and told, okay, Georgia, make that work. You know, tell the fucking plebeians whatever you have to tell them, you know, but make sure that we get these hundreds of thousands of workers that we need, and make sure that the rhetoric doesn't get in the way of the reality. And so the phrase in Italian is "Ok, ora fai funzionare questa cosa." Apparently, according to Google Translate. I don't speak Italian. So, good evening to Anthony in Prague, Jerry in Hampshire, Gonzalo Cabrera, who says, needs some communist help here, comrades. Okay, well, your communist parties are bigger than ours, so, but then again, quantity does not always translate into quality. Lucas Van Blair, hello to you. Good afternoon, in fact, from the USA. Hello to Comrade Davey. Hello to Mo1917. Luca asks, but could you please clarify the position of the USSR vis-a-vis the creation of Israel in 1948? Yeah. The USSR's delegation to the United Nations voted for the partition plan in 1948. That's true. Now, there are some out there who scream that this was all Stalin's fault and that this was some kind of like hideous sin that cannot be forgiven. But let's address the question honestly. Do I know, as I said in the last Q&A, why it is that the Soviet Union's leadership, people say Stalin, but again, it was a collective leadership that would have discussed this, why the Soviet Union voted for the partition plan? I don't know for sure. I haven't seen the records from that time in the USSR. Maybe someone out there has and could inform me if I'm right about this. But my assumption is that it was a combination of factors which led to this point. First of all, the Zionists did play very effectively a skillful diplomatic game in the post-World War II era. They very successfully exploited the genuine feelings of horror at the Holocaust to engender sympathy for the idea of a Jewish state. They played that game very well. There was a concerted effort on behalf of the political leadership in occupied Palestine at the time, headed by David Ben-Gurion, to portray the Zionist state that was coming into existence as a socialist endeavor. People forget this now. It was portrayed as a form of socialism. It's about as socialist as fucking Australia or New Zealand or Canada, but this is how it was portrayed. This is how it was sold. And also, a lot of people from a lot of Russian speakers from the nations of the USSR did migrate to Israel, and so there was a certain connection there. Also, the Zionists sold themselves to the socialist world as anti-British liberation fighters. Now, that might seem ludicrous now, given the long-term alliance between the British and the Zionists, but the British and the Zionists did come into conflict in the period immediately after World War II to a degree. And they spun that idea that they were a national liberation force that was going to kick the British out and was going to be pro-Soviet. Now, again, I don't know for sure how much all of that played into the ultimate Soviet decision to back the partition plan. But I think we can say without a doubt that it was a mistake. There's no doubt about that. And in fact, even the later revisionist leadership of the Soviet Union didn't turn to being pro-Israel again until like the later Gorbachev era, where everything had just completely degenerated, all the way through the period immediately after 1948. So after the initial war and the Nakba, the Soviet leadership went back to properly critiquing Zionism again. So I think that there was also a struggle within, an ideological struggle going on within the CPSU, of which Stalin, it seems clear to me, given his statements on the issue and the statements of Andrei Zhdanov, Molotov, Lazar Kaganovich and others who were close to Stalin, that they represented a bloc that was anti-Zionist. But I think that there would have been those in the Soviet Party who, for various reasons, were pro-Zionist. Again, there's no point denying that. There clearly was a pro-Zionist influence in there. And now they were marginalized quite quickly, but they did exercise an influence for a while. So I think all of that played a role in influencing the decision. And again, as I say many times, and as anybody remotely serious will say, like the Soviet leadership consisted of far, far more than just Stalin. Stalin was not just sitting there saying, going through a big list saying, we'll back this revolution here and we'll back that there. We'll back the creation of Israel here and we'll back something else over here. No, this would have been subject to a discussion at the highest levels of the Soviet state. And it would have a decision would have been reached based on the strength of the various different positions that were outlined. And I think for a variety of reasons in 1948, the decision to back the partition plan was made, and that was a terrible mistake. But to those who try to chalk up the foundation of the state of Israel to Stalin, their position is a fundamentally dishonest one, because who was truly responsible for the creation of the state of Israel? Well, other than the Zionists themselves, they couldn't have done it without being dedicated servants of and very strong allies of the British for many decades. In fact, going back to the 1890s. So it was the British who oversaw waves of Zionist migration into Palestine in the later 1900s, 1920s, 1930s, into the 1940s. There was a brief period where the British went into conflict with some of the most ultra-fascistic Zionist gangs like the Irgun group. But for most of that time, it was the British who were building the state of Israel and who were planning the partition as early as the 1930s, which is part of what triggered the Arab uprisings in the later 1930s. There are the CPGB pamphlets done by Willie Gallagher on this that chronicled at the time and critiqued this at the time. So it was the British who were midwifing this abomination, and their role again was taken over by the US. So it was the British and the US imperialists who were, again, principally responsible for the creation of the State of Israel. It was the British who were responsible for the maintenance of the Arab comprador regimes like Egypt and Iraq and Jordan, who were proved utterly unwilling and completely incapable of militarily defeating the Zionists in 1948. And again, it was the British who used their alliance with the Zionists to try and knock out Nasser in Egypt. So those ultra-leftists who put the blame for the foundation of Israel on the Soviet Union, this is a laughable position. It was a project of imperialism. Now, the Soviet leadership, in my view, clearly made a mistake in voting for that partition plan. But even that partition plan, it must be said, had the provision in it for a Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel. So what the Soviet delegation was voting for was the creation of, was basically what's now called the two-state solution, albeit it would have been on a much more extensive basis that the Palestinian state would have existed had it been brought into being. Now, it's still an unjust position. It's still rewarding settler colonialism. It's still an imperialist plan. But what the Soviet delegation voted for was not what was brought into existence. And the Soviet position shifted back to an anti-imperialist, proper anti-imperialist position very shortly afterwards. So yes, a mistake was made. We might as well just say that straight away. But there's reasons for it. And it reflects a lot of the conditions that were present at the time and the conditions both in the external world and within the factional struggles within the CPSU. And if we look at all that, we can arrive at a good guess as to why what happened. But again, those who place the blame for the creation of Israel on Stalin and the USSR, this is a ludicrous position favored by Trotskyites. Right, okay. Hello to Tracy Wilkinson, Evgeny Nikolaev, Enigma, Caustic Grit, Comrade Lee, Alistair Page McGill, T.G. Wilson, who joins us from the fading and declining imperial power of France and its coked-up Zelensky-like president. Evgeny has a question, and he says, if the West loses in Ukraine and will have to redirect its class war onwards, how do you think it will manifest itself? It feels like the stakes have never been this high for the ruling class. They haven't been this high for quite some time. And in terms of how it will manifest itself, first of all, the war in Ukraine, they will, that is certainly the British ruling class, and elements in the American, will try and spin this out for as long as they possibly can. That's one thing. They are desperate to make sure that the war in Ukraine continues for as long as possible, in order that they can try desperately to reach to inflict some kind of defeat on the Russians. So far, that isn't working due to the strength of Russian popular opinion behind the idea that the war has to be prosecuted to a victorious conclusion following the sacrifices that have been made. Now, I saw some analysis today that stated that the reason why they're so keen now on this 30-day ceasefire is precisely because the NATO force in Ukraine, consisting mainly of Ukrainians with various NATO specialists attached to it, is reaching a point of no return. That there is very little that they've got left in the tank, so to speak. So they're desperate to just reach a pause, just to have a pause in the fighting in order that they can rearm and re-equip. The Russians know this very well. It's why they're not giving the West the 30-day ceasefire that they're desperately screaming that they must have. Because, again, the Russians know if they give that 30-day ceasefire, it will just be used to rearm and re-equip Ukraine as much as they can. and it may even see the introduction of NATO forces into the west of Ukraine. So the Russians can't afford to stop, nor can they afford to pay any attention really to the screeches and bellowing of the pathetic rats in Europe or in the US, to be quite blunt. They can't move in without basically a Russian fuck up. And a Russian fuck up would be allowing this ceasefire, which I think is what Putin would probably have said to Trump. I'll go into this more in the Decline and Fall episode tomorrow. So, but to answer Evgeny's question, how will it manifest itself? We're already seeing it a little bit from Starmer, but I think it'll go much further. You'll see like wholesale attempts to reduce wages down to bare subsistence level. And there's plenty of people who are on bare subsistence already. There'll be attempts to reindustrialize using special economic zones. There'll be attempts to completely break what remaining power trade unions have. There'll be gigantic amounts of domestic repression. There'll be moves to out and out forms of Bonapartism, all done in the name of preserving democracy, of course. There'll be bans on strikes. We're already a long way towards this. They've been doing these kind of things for years, but you'll see an acceleration of this, depending upon the severity of the defeat in Ukraine and how bad a disaster it unleashes, economically speaking. But all of those are the kind of things that we will see, and it'll be an acceleration of the trends that we've seen really over the last like 15 to 20 years, where things have been getting more and more repressive, but they will need to escalate the level of attacks on the working class. And therein will lie an opportunity for us if we're ready to take it. Because one of the things the British ruling class has avoided doing over the last 50 years or so has been attacking the working class at the same time or all at once. They've done the bacon slicer approach for most of their attacks. If they have to attack everybody all at once, that'll be them breaking one of their own rules that they established after they were defeated in this country and nearby the mining union in the early 1970s. So we'll see, but it will present to us with a certain opportunity. We'll also see to make sure one of the ways they will try and make sure that they can divide the working class before they start is the promotion of like the anti-migrant and outright racialist political parties of various different shades. We're already seeing that as well, but they'll be promoted relentlessly over the next few years. And part of the way they'll promote them is by them telling you over and over again how dangerous they are and that you shouldn't vote for them. This is the game. Our priest says, who is the leader of the communist movement today? Well, here's part of the problem. We don't have a unified communist movement. There is no Comintern, and hasn't been for many, many years. There's not even a Cominform anymore. Some would argue that the leader of if there is a leader, it's the CPC, Communist Party of China, but they neither seek leadership nor, in reality, provide much. They have not been making any serious moves in terms of international organization for decades now, and that doesn't look like changing for now. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are different dynamics going on in the Chinese party now. So in terms of size and actual influence in the world, it would be them, but they don't seek that for their own reasons. In terms of the loudest voices in the international communist, amongst communist parties internationally, unfortunately, the Greeks are the loudest, even though they have become a Trotskyite organization now. In terms of like those with the most well-developed position within a capitalist country, Communist Party of the Russian Federation are a tremendously significant force. In fact, the more I read of their positions and their analysis, the more impressive they become in many respects, and the more important their role is, given that the influence that they have wielded since the mid-90s, since their foundation. In fact, they have had a tremendous influence on the development of things in Russia. And you read their analysis of the twists and turns of Russian capitalism, and you can see that they and their program have influenced the Putin system repeatedly over the years. They were instrumental in the downfall of Yeltsin. So not in the way that, you know, Lenin and the Bolsheviks overthrew Russian capitalism, but they have exercised a great deal of influence over the Putin-led government over the years. We know that Putin has turned to Zyuganov and the KPRF leadership for advice on numerous occasions. And the KPRF's line, as established in 2014 after the Maidan coup, on the need for a military intervention against the NATO-sponsored fascistic statelet being cultivated by the US and the British in Ukraine, that line became state policy, as did their line on Crimea. And so in terms of influential parties, CPC is still a tremendously influential party in the world, despite the fact that they very publicly don't seek to be the leader of an international communist movement, but they are still tremendously influential. KPRF have exercised an enormous influence over the last 3 decades, more so, I think, than anybody in the West properly appreciated. It's only since I started reading Russian sources that I started to appreciate how much influence they actually wielded and how important they are in the Russian system, both as an opposition party and as a party that can wield a certain degree of influence over the Russian government. So they are, I'd say they're one of the most important communist parties in the world, possibly second only to the CPC. You've got others as well. I mean, the Workers' Party of Korea has a great deal of influence, and increasing amounts of influence, I would say, given their track record now, and given that they have been a government party in now what is the longest surviving socialist state in the world, worker state in the world, which is, of course, the DPRK. The Cuban party is influential, but I don't think they are as influential these days as they used to be. I think they're probably less influential now than the WPK is of Korea. Europeans, no, basically. Look, the European parties, including the Greeks, have either dissolved, degenerated, or just imploded. The anti-revisionist parties, Marxist-Leninist parties in Europe are influential but small. So my own party, CPG-BML, becoming very influential, or quite influential, I think it's fair to say, through the anti-imperialist platform, and building a certain profile for ourselves internationally speaking, but we would make no claim as to leadership at this stage. I mean, the ACP, too early to say yet, could become a real force amongst the international communist movement, but again, too early to say what their fate will be. And then we're looking at others like the Vietnamese, the Laotians, not really leaders of any international movement, I would say. Essentially, the Vietnamese are running a similar model to the Chinese, don't seek any kind of leadership of the international communist movement, if what such a thing could even be said to exist. So I think my answer on this has revealed to us a certain problem, which is that those states where communist parties hold power generally haven't sought to build or influence an international communist movement in the previous generation. That may change in the time to come, but it'll be up to us to make that change. Hello to Rob Seaborn in sunny Queensland. Hello to Why I Ain't Cool over on Twitch. And we've got Kushtrim Shala, who says, how much does the worsening of the climate catastrophe is being considered in regards to the urgency to coordinate and plan the fight on this front as well. You know what? I'm going to shove that one into climate change episode that I will be doing soon. So email me that question, and I will put it in the environmental episode that I've got that's been long planned. Okay. So, can I play Katyusha? Asks David King. Maybe. We'll see. Hello to Jerry. Hello to Abtin. Hello to Jimmy from the People's Republic of West Yorkshire. Abtin was enjoying the Korean song there. Hello to David Ball out there in Trenton. Hello to Lavitz out there in San Francisco. Luca asks, do the Green New Deal and degrowth theories appeal to the same or different public? I feel the debate seems to be all inside left liberal circles. Well, Green New Deal, I mean, is essentially just like an attempt to sort of rebrand Keynesianism, but by sticking the word green on the front of it. And again, won't work for all the reasons we've gone into before. This thing called degrowth, I mean, there are those who identify themselves as green anti-growth theorists. These people are talking complete garbage and have only been elevated because of the extreme decay of the imperialist nations' economies. Now, what capitalism does isn't degrowth as such when it enters into crisis. What capitalism requires when it enters into crisis is destruction. It's destruction. Again, let's go back to the old line from a very prominent U.S. politician, Andrew Mellon, and prominent capitalist, of course, who had a very, very famous quote from the time of the Great Depression. And he was honestly summing up the doctrine of his class and the needs of his class when he said, liquidate labor, liquidate stocks, liquidate farmers, liquidate real estate. It will purge the rottenness out of the system. High costs of living and high living will come down. People will work harder, live a more moral life. Values will be adjusted, and enterprising people will pick up the wrecks from less competent people. And that was Andrew Mellon, who was, of course, Herbert Hoover's Treasury Secretary. And the reason why I mention that is because that is the nature of capitalism when it enters into a severe crisis, which is it needs to essentially purge its way out. So at the moment, what you've got in the Western world is a gigantic amount of capital which can't be invested, won't be invested because it's not profitable enough to invest it, which is why you keep getting asset bubbles and speculative bubbles. So because there's no profitable way forward, the banks and other major capitalist institutions just sit on this gigantic amount of capital. That if the rottenness is to be purged out of the system, to quote Mellon, then what's needed is to actually purge all of that, to destroy, to liquidate capital, to liquidate surplus capital, to liquidate surplus commodities. I mean, it's the reason why, ideally, the imperialists would like to have some kind of war where they could liquidate all the surplus stuff. And now, of course, they can't because that's too risky for them, which is part of the reason why the system is jammed up like it is. So the degrowth theorists are the sort of fringe green cranks who got elevated because their theories appeal to certain fools in the state and academic management structures, because they can use those theories to justify why the economy is fucking stagnant, which it is. It's been stagnant for 17 years now. It's a long time. So you've had this long depression, which is in many ways worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s in terms of it's just relentless decline, because they refuse, or it's politically impossible for them to purge the system, to do what Andrew Mellon suggested. And bear in mind, the US capitalist class tried to do that in like the 1930s and couldn't do it, which is why you ended up with the Compromise of Roosevelt. And they can't do it now either. They could have done it in 2008, but it would have led to an unchained catastrophe had they tried to do that, had they tried to follow like the Peter Schiff line. So again, degrowth theorists are this sort of a bizarre intellectual fad, which is popular because it helps bourgeois politicians explain why the system's in the fucking toilet. But again, it doesn't actually seriously deal with the nature of the crisis. What was the West's contribution to the fall of the USSR? Well, this is the thing. I need to do more research on it. I would say not as much as we think, but more than I initially suspected. So the idea that the USSR got spent into an early grave by the genius of Reagan and the Star Wars program and overstretched in Afghanistan, that is wildly overstated. In fact, I would say that both of those are minor factors, if they're factors at all. The role of the West in the destruction of the USSR, I think, is actually more insidious than the sort of the big ticket items that are usually mentioned by like popular so-called historians. I'd say the role of the West is there's many different layers here. First and very importantly, if not most importantly, you have the direct action against the socialist countries. So that means terroristic plots, internal subversion, espionage, assassination campaigns, seeding of and manipulation of discontent within the socialist countries, intelligence and psychological operations. All of that plays a role because that was consistent in terms of the application of those tactics to the USSR and the socialist bloc from 1917 onwards. So they were always doing that. It was a constant source of pressure upon the USSR, and at certain times went all the way towards sort of the CIA and MI6 openly backing insurgencies. And for instance, the Forrest brothers after World War II, and the Banderite insurgency in Ukraine that ran up to 1952. So that's one pressure that's constantly on the USSR, and that's an important pressure. Flowing from that is then the propaganda side of the operation. So the USSR and the socialist countries have to engage in repression against the various different insurgencies and terroristic elements that exist in the country. So then you get the propaganda side of it, which is all about, oh my God, where say the paid hacks, the academics, the fake socialists, etc., who all scream and yell and cry about repression in the USSR. And despite the fact that this repression is absolutely necessary to prevent insurgencies turning into fully destabilizing elements and undermining the foundations of the proletarian state. And as long as the USSR maintained properly the dictatorship of the proletariat, such things could be squashed with, if not relative ease, then without too much sort of disruption that would threaten the integrity of the socialist state. The problem with the later revisionist era was that the leadership under Brezhnev started to. In fact, it started under Khrushchev. They started to make concessions, which were partly made to pro-capitalist elements domestically, and partially made to the West, which is like the stopping of the repression of pro-capitalist forces. So that was a major factor, I would say, in the degeneration of the USSR. The Khrushchev's arbitrary abolition of the dictatorship of the proletariat, the completely opportunistic declaration that socialism had already been reached, the allowing of nationalistic, or should we say fake nationalist elements in Georgia, for instance, where their activities were particularly ruinous, and the Baltic states and Ukraine to run unchallenged. the adoption of like various different human rights treaties, like for instance through the Helsinki Protocols, and the sort of and the concession over the creation of like the OSCE and all these ridiculous institutions that just serve as Western intelligence operations. All of that had an influence within the USSR, and a very, very negative one, and one that manifested itself fully when the Gorbachev leadership basically let all of these tendencies, which imperialism had worked very hard to cultivate in the USSR, completely off the leash. So imperialism played a significant role in the fall of socialism. They were constantly working towards it. They needed it. They needed to destroy socialism. Bear in mind, by the time that the socialist bloc fell in the 1980s, imperialism was in a deep crisis of its own. They only got out of it because of their ability to exploit the former socialist bloc countries and destroy and asset strip their economies. So they needed that collapse, and they needed it to happen when it happened, which leads me to think, and again, this is my speculation, they may have had more to do with the final collapse than we previously anticipated, than we previously suspected. Again, I don't know for sure because I'm still doing the reading on this, but they needed the reason why they tried to dial up the pressure on the Soviet Union and the socialist bloc in the 80s was because they themselves, the imperialist bloc, was in a crisis, and they needed to try and secure the collapse of the socialist system. The reason why the imperialists were always going on about the horrors of repression in the Stalin era was because the Stalin era actually successfully suppressed many different conspiracies that did exist and that were supported by the British, the French, the fascists of German and Italian and Japanese origin, the various different internal subversion attempts by the Trotskyites in league with these groups. That's what upset them. It's why they were constantly on at the Soviet Union, be less repressive, be less repressive. What they were wanting is for their agents to be allowed to operate without restriction. That's what this was all about. And that should have been clear to anybody. But unfortunately, we in the imperialist countries had our left wing dominated by revisionists who were cowards and refused to say openly that our counter-revolutionary elements should be suppressed violently if necessary, and Trotskyites who spent all their time agreeing and boosting imperialist propaganda about the horrors of repression in the Soviet Union. In the end, what was needed was the maintenance of the dictatorship of the proletariat and the ability to mobilize the masses. This is what was needed, and the loss of both that and even the bureaucratic administrative measures that could be taken against anti-socialist elements in the system, both revisionists, liquidationists, and beyond and outside the system, criminal and corrupt elements in running the shadow economy. The effective dissolution of the power of the repressive organs of the state by the CPSU leadership is a big part of what led to the collapse, and part of the influence behind all of that was, of course, the imperialists themselves. Okay. Right, just looking at the chat here, it would seem we have trolls on the go, so you will have to bear with me a moment. I'm just going to go and clean that the fuck out. I'll be back in just a moment. Right. Okay. Troll maintenance work done. Idiots removed. Right. Okay. Just going back up here to go through the chat. Right. So, question from Abtin. It says, "What do you think will happen now as the genocide in Palestine intensifies and negotiations are taking place, and normalization and pressure is intensifying? Is Palestine doomed?" I would say no, because ultimately all of this is taking place against a backdrop of the implosion of imperialism, bit by bit and piece by piece. The reason why the Zionist state is moving in again to the Gaza Strip is because it's out of desperation. They have no other move to make. Their government is a clown car. We're filled with lunatics such as Smotrich and Kurdish Peter Griffin and others. They have no move to make other than expansion or an attempted expansion again into Gaza or to try and to carry out some kind of massive ethnic cleansing of the West Bank, to try and expand into Syria. But all of this is against the backdrop of internal collapse, both economically and politically, and also militarily. So they've got a severe set of problems which they won't be able to resolve. The Palestinian people refuse to be removed. They refuse to just leave their land. There is ever escalating opposition to the role that the imperialists are playing. I mean, this is why Starmer and Macron and Carney came out with that complete bullshit statement about how much they disapproved of what Israel's doing. None of that means anything, because certainly Britain is still providing arms to Israel and still providing intelligence sharing to Israel. But the fact that they've had to issue that purely PR statement shows that they've got domestic problems. So the damage done to the Zionist regime is very real and very long lasting. So that's for all those reasons, and the fact that they won't be able to do what they want to do on the West Bank, not fully. To me, what that says is that the game isn't over yet by a long way, but not only is it the case that the Zionist state, as it is currently constituted, will not survive. And again, I'm not just pulling that out of thin air. The US intelligence agencies were forecasting a collapse by around about 2030 of the Zionist state. They all knew that it had a limited shelf life. So I would say resistance will continue. Trump's policy, again, is the same as Biden's policy, because it's the policy of the US state itself and the US ruling class, which is to try and preserve the Israeli regime for as long as they can. Ultimately, though, if it gets too costly and it has no utility anymore, they'll dump it. Now, as to what is going on with these negotiations with Iran, I need to look more into this. I suspect that what is being played here is a cynical game by the Trump administration, the same kind of cynical game that the US imperialists always play, which is they will try and lure the Iranians into a terrible agreement that the Iranians cannot possibly agree, the terrible terms that the Iranians cannot possibly agree to. They will then say the Iranians have rejected negotiations in an entirely unreasonable fashion. And then what will happen is, well, some factions in the US state favor some kind of attack on Iran. I have outlined ad nauseum my reasons for believing that is not possible for them to actually do successfully. So I think what we'll see is that the resistance will reorient itself. we're already seeing Rubio and the American State Department claim that the HTS regime that was imposed on Syria following the collapse of the Ba'athist government there and the capitulation of Assad, that the HTS regime is on the point of collapse, and so it's the civil war breaking out all over again. Now, whether that happens or not is another question, but the fact that they're now considering it, the fact that they haven't managed to stabilize Syria at all, even under the chosen men of the British, led by what's his name, Jelani al-Sharaa, Dave from Northampton. I don't know what his name is anymore. Maybe he doesn't either. But certainly their plots aren't working, and this is part of the reason why the Israeli regime is facing such a crisis. And also the belief that they had weakened Hezbollah significantly in the eyes of the Lebanese population has been disabused by apparently Hezbollah doing rather well in Lebanese local elections recently. So the war is not over, the struggle is not over, and I think that the Israeli regime is on a downward slope now. It's just a question of how much damage they can do before the end comes and how the end is delivered. Right. Okay. Don't get lured into discussions with lunatic fascists who babble on ceaselessly about Jews, by the way. Hitler was a drugged up loser who these days would have been running a Tumblr channel and would probably have gone trans. That's the kind of character that the Nazis. Right. Right, scrolling down. Do you think the repression in the USSR leaned too heavily against freedom of speech? I would say that there was serious mistakes made in the revisionist period, especially the Brezhnev era, in terms of many things. First of all, I would say we should stop considering freedom of speech in the typical bourgeois way, because that's freedom of speech for the ruling class. Now, what was a mistake, well, perhaps a deliberate one, in the revisionist period, was that there was an attempt by the revisionists and by the pro-capitalist elements to push the political level of the working class downwards, and to push the working class out of senior positions within the party and the state, and to make the nomenclatura self-reproducing, and that it did do severe damage. And part of what I think the Andropov project was about revitalizing the party. See, in the Brezhnev period, one of the things that Stalin always insists on, if you read any of his writings about party organization, was that problems should be identified and confronted, and that the party should be rigorous in its self-criticism, and that the party media operations, so the papers and later the radio and TV stations, should be used to actually not only publicize state and party successes, but also should be used to report on things like Politburo meetings, the meetings of like senior bodies of the party in the state. This had stopped happening in the Brezhnev period, where there was a concerted attempt to damp down and keep disputes and problems out of public view. This was an attempt that was made, and that was a mistake. Or perhaps it was an attempt by the collective leadership that existed in the period nominally referred to as the Brezhnev period, to try and keep the divisions that were real and very much did exist from breaking out and becoming more visible. Andropov was trying to reverse that, and into the sense of trying to reinvigorate the party and turn it back into the genuine vanguard of the working class again, in a sense that it had lost some of that, turning it back into a revolutionary fighting organization again by reinvigorating it at the base level. That was part of what, according to KPRF sources anyway, that Andropov was trying to do. Didn't have enough time to do it. This continued to a degree under Chernenko as well. But under Andropov, they increased the amount of reporting of Politburo meetings that was done. Andropov started plans to reinvigorate the party, part of which was using the media to properly report upon senior level party meetings, activities, etc. See, that was a return to more typical revolutionary Bolshevik values, shall we say, which includes vigorous self-criticism and admission of failures that was not done in the Brezhnev and the Khrushchev period. In the Stalin period, it was much more common, and certainly I would argue that part of the 1930s is that saw the ability of the working class to come out and publicly criticize and bring down to earth with a bump in many times, and with many people, state officials, factory managers, etc. And this is part of what was hated by the officialdom in the Stalin period, that the workers had the ability to influence the 5-year plans, to influence their working conditions, to override and sometimes remove factory managers and party officials. That's the impact of a dictatorship of the proletariat, especially in the 1930s. There was a very real example of the class struggle, as Stalin observed, as Mao observed, carrying on after the revolution. And what all true communists understand is that the Communist Party has to remain, even when it is a governing party, it also has to remain, and this is a difficult thing to achieve, a party of the advanced workers, a party of the masses, a party that is, whilst running the government, it is also a party that is leading the working class in opposition to bourgeois trends and to against imperialist influence, which was successfully done for a while in the Soviet Union in Stalin's time. And self-criticism and the holding of officials to account is a crucial part of that, holding of officials to account by the working class. This is, again, this is why I say that from all the reading I've done about Andropov, I think he was part of the revolutionary wing. There are some people in Russia that would vehemently disagree with that, but I haven't seen them make a clear case that isn't based on speculation yet. But given what he was trying to do as leader, I would say that Andropov was trying to restore some of that. And also, I would say that the Chinese leaders have studied the legacies of Stalin and Mao, and also studied the Andropov period, and have actually properly implemented some of the ideas that Andropov was trying to push through. So, for instance, if you read the works of Xi Jinping, for instance, what his period as General Secretary represents to a large degree is this reinvigoration of the party. And again, this was a concern that Stalin had in the 30s, this balance between the party running the state, but also remaining a party of the workers, of the masses, that would be prepared to actually lead the masses, sometimes against elements in the powerful elements in the bourgeois elements of the party in the state. So this is again part of what Andropov was doing, and I think it has manifested itself in a new way in the Xi era in China. What the Xi era has been about, and along with, of course, the mass industrialization across all of the country, the anti-poverty campaign, which has been waged quite successfully, in fact, very successfully, but also about reinvigorating the party and carrying out an ongoing purge of corrupt officialdom, which is what the Xi era has been, if not defined by it, he's certainly one of the defining features of it. And this is why you see every week in the Chinese press more corrupt officials on trial. Now, one might say, well, given that there's so many corrupt officials in the state, doesn't that point to certain problems? And my answer to that would be yes. But it's certainly the case that the Xi era represents like an attempt to reorient the party, reinvigorate it, and reinstill the values of heroic self-sacrifice that it takes to be a communist, along with the strong elements of self-criticism that were always there in the Stalin and Mao eras in the Soviet Union and in China, and which the Xi era has seen again reinvigorated. So I would say that to go back to Alan, it's my rather long-winded way of answering Alan's question, which is that what's needed is not the freedom of speech as it is defined by the bourgeoisie. What is needed is the restoration. What was needed in the USSR was the restoration of the dictatorship of the proletariat. What was needed was the reinvigoration of the party at the base level. What was needed was the empowering of the working class to speak out against corrupt, self-serving officialdom and to have those people arrested and purged from the system. That's what was required. That's what I think Andropov and to a certain extent Chernenko were trying to do. Ultimately, both of them failed due to reasons of ill health. And it's what the Xi Jinping era has done to a much more successful extent due to the fact that the Chinese party is, even with all the deviations of revisionism that it undoubtedly has engaged in, still remains more vibrant and more able to adjust itself than the Soviet party was, unfortunately. Fortunately for China, unfortunately for the USSR. Right. Nikki Khan says Solzhenitsyn, Cold War poster boy of anti-communism, wrote a story in 1996 that mourned the USSR's collapse, praised Stalin's industrial legacy, and condemned post-Soviet capitalism. I've heard of that. Yes, not read it. Okay. Right. Someone's saying I have a great camera angle, lighting and stuff like that in this stream. Well, I am elevating the standards, comrades. Abtin says I have a great, I can say a lot about the deals with Iran. I was thinking about the deals with the Arab states. It seems like they are trying to force normalization by pressure, and the Gulf states are playing Trump. Yeah, I think the Gulf states are playing both sides of the fence on this one. I think what they're doing is they're getting as much as they can out of Trump while stringing him along, and they won't want to take too many risks. Certainly, won't want to take too many risks. So they'll be getting whatever they can out of him, and at the same time making as fewer commitments as possible. They certainly don't want to end up in a shooting war with Iran, which is what some in Washington want. Don't think they'll get their way either, though. Bryce says, what are your thoughts on ACP Chairman Haz's Twitter thread on why Marxist theory in the West is meaningless without the aid of Dugin and Heidegger's thinking? Haven't read it, so I can't comment on it. Once I've read it, I will comment on it. Yeah. post it in the Telegram group, or just at me on Twitter with it. Would I ever have a discussion with Has from the ACP? Hadn't occurred to me, but I'm not opposed to it. The work by Solzhenitsyn is called Breaking Point, or At the Fractures. Interesting. Toporovsky says, are you as critical of Buddhism as you are the other major religions? Overlap with Marxism, atheism, non-dualism, emphasis on impermanence, emphasis on practice rather than metaphysical theory. Yeah, I am, because I've met a lot of Buddhists, and they're as hypocritical as Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, anybody else. Go into any of the major religions, and you can make something that looks like a form of socialism out of it. Go into Christianity. You can make a form of asceticism. You can find, like, you can lead an ascetic, self-disciplined life of prayer and reflection. You can, if you abide by all the strictures of how many times a Catholic should pray every day, you can spend half your day in contemplation with the Almighty. You can do good by the poor. You can maybe even be in favor of empowering the poor in some way or another. You can dress simply. You can live plainly. All of those things. Same is true of Islam. Many people, many Christians and Muslims do try and behave that way. I mean, I've read less of Jewish religious thought, but I'm reliably informed that similar messages can be found in there as well. The problem with all of these things is, for me, these are all idealist, pre-capitalist modes of thought. The reason why I reject them is because I reject idealism, or as communists should. I reject idealism, and therefore I reject all forms of religion. And again, like, my position on this, if you want to be a Buddhist, a Muslim, a Christian, a Jew, whatever, or Hindu, or a Sikh, fine. Under a workers' state, you should have the freedom to do that. But communists should be scientific socialists, and that means should also be atheists, because we can't have idealism confusing and diverting things. It only leads to eclecticism and foolish decisions being made by communists. Religious people can play a part, of course, in the revolutionary movement. They can be a part of broad front organizations. We can discuss different ideas with them. We can debate the nature of faith and atheism with them. And maybe some of them will be really good comrades who will play a vital role in the revolution. But communist parties should be atheistic places, no matter where they are. And that should always be the case. Pavel Linovsky asks, I have heard from a bourgeois expert that because of no investment debt, the bursting of the everything bubble in the West could lead to 80% effective pay cut. How are we organized to survive this? If that is, well, assuming that that's true, I mean, I haven't seen any papers on that. I mean, some in the capitalist class would want that. That would also lead to severe problems for the capitalists, because essentially that would lead to systemic collapse. You do an 80% pay cut on the working class in Britain, no one's buying anything. What are you going to do? You're going to have the entire country now dependent upon soup kitchens? Now, again, some in the ruling class would see that as a price worth paying. But it would also lead to the complete collapse of the consumer economy. And so the ruling class would then have to go back to like early Victorian methods to reindustrialize. It would lead to a near revolutionary situation very, very quickly. And the ruling class might not be able to contain the situation. So how do we organize to survive this? Well, we have to organize ourselves as revolutionary parties across the West. We have to be clear with the proletariat that this, if not 80% effective pay cut, then something like that is around the corner. This is coming. that no matter how secure you might feel now, that the ruling class is planning is going to have to make some severe moves against us very soon. And therefore, we need to establish ourselves in as many working class communities as possible and prepare ourselves to, build ourselves to the point where we can actually realistically become a genuine vanguard parties again. Because that's the only way that we're going to get out of this. It's the only way forward now. And we're seeing this slowly dawn on people, like that there's no way out. Not through this system, not through parliaments, not through reforms, not through twists and turns and constitutional conventions or any of the other dumb shit that liberals believe in. There's no, the old slogan is one solution revolution, and that is the solution. This system can't be saved. And no matter what weird eccentric shit is promoted by the bourgeois to distract from that, it's going to perish really quickly. So like right-wing populism will be destroyed partially by the depth of the capitalist crisis and by the working class struggle against it. The racialists will make their play and be destroyed by their own contradictions very quickly. They can do an awful lot of damage as they go down, of course. Let's not get complacent here. We need to build our organizations across the working class areas of the country, and we need to do so in a way that completely steps outside of most of the rotten traditions of the Western left, because otherwise we'll just stay in a shit student ghetto. So the answer to everything is to build revolutionary communist parties, build militant parties of the working class again that are ready to actually take whatever form of revolutionary action is required to address the revolutionary situations that are going to emerge. That's the only way out. The only way out is to build the communist parties as parties of of vanguards of the working class again, and then be in a position where we can take action when the crisis hits in a severe way. That's the only way out. There's no other way around it, and more people will come to realize that as we continue to circle the plug hole. Which, other than the Lazardo book, what would I recommend for sort of myth busting about Stalin, asks Enigmaticon. I would say also all the books by Grover Furr, also Ludo Martin's Another View of Stalin, also Harpal Brah's Perestroika, or the Complete Collapse of Revisionism. Those all of those should read all of them to thoroughly counter the bourgeois narratives against Stalin. Imagine a BBC question where Alex gets a regular slot on question time. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Though I may apply. Who knows? Hello to President Jesus. Ash says religion is an escape from alienation and can be subversive against individualism, but cannot take society forward. It has expired its usefulness, and Ash is 100% correct. Topadovsky says, thank you for your answer regarding Buddhism. Personally, I'm open to Buddhism, or at least some secular Zen practice or potential to counter alienation and strengthen the minds of the vanguard. I would say that the proper application of Marxism, Leninism, and the proper study of it can provide all of what you're looking for there. But you have to find your own path on that question. Tony said, or asked, were the terms of Brexit ever outlined in the referendum? No. If not, then Brexit is not necessarily whatever Farage supporters say it is. No, but it was never outlined because they never thought for a moment that they would win, Tony. That's part of the problem that they had. The people who were campaigning for a Leave vote never expected to win. Like, this is the reason why Boris Johnson basically tried to run away immediately after it, because he's a lazy, feckless asshole who has no intention of ever doing any work. But that's the situation that they found themselves in. which is that they suddenly had to conduct a Brexit deal with like a very divided Conservative parliamentary party, a ruling class that was dead set against it, and a Labour Party that was also in a chaotic mess. And so Brexit was never defined because they never expected to have to do it. So the various deals that Theresa May and then Boris Johnson and then Liz Truss and then Sunak and now Starmer have done, I mean, Boris, well, really, it wasn't him that was doing it. It was Dominic Cummings that was doing the thinking. He came closest to doing one, but even that was a muddled, confused mess that left the Irish question unresolved, in a state of sort of strategic ambiguity. Because again, like they didn't know what the fuck they were supposed to do, and the ruling class was completely opposed to Brexit. It's why Johnson ended up in a mess. It's why Truss was got rid of. It's why Sunak started reorienting back to the EU because they don't know what else to do. So the terms weren't defined because and also Farage didn't know what it was supposed to mean either. Farage didn't expect to win. That's why he fucked off immediately after the vote was in, because again, he didn't expect to ever come out on top. And then he comes back every now and again when the bourgeoisie or some of the bourgeoisie require his services. So none of the people, Brexit under capitalism, Brexit under sort of late stage decaying imperialism was never going to work because it's just too much. It would do too much damage to the interests of the ruling class if it was seriously implemented. And it couldn't be because of the state of British capitalism anyway. The only way to actually get a Brexit is to actually overthrow the ruling class and build socialism. And then you would, of course, want to be in a close relationship with the emerging socialist states of Europe. So again, like the reason to back Brexit all the way back in 2016 is to throw a spanner in the works of the British ruling class's operations. And on that basis, it was thoroughly justified in voting for it. Right. Okay. So I am going to bring things to a close for this evening. Been going for a little while. Thanks to all 461 of you watching. And thanks to our Hitlerite troll who has now been expelled. I'll be back with you again tomorrow with an episode of Decline and Fall. Further episodes to come about the EU and about, and with it, we've got an interview special coming up later in the week. Thanks to everybody who supports the program on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in tonight. Be sure to like and share the stream and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. But until tomorrow with the Decline and Fall show, I'll say thank you and good night.
Chi Minh, Ho Chi Minh, Ho Chi Minh.
Hồ Chí Minh. Miền biển xa, người đi khắp phương trời, ở nơi xa đó người dân đói nghèo, từ đau thương người đi khắp năm châu lòng tin mặt trời chân lý sáng soi, dõi chiếu sáng dân mình. Hồ Chí Minh, Hồ Chí Minh, Hồ Chí Minh. Vượt trùng sông, người đi khắp phương trời, luyện tôi ý chí lòng núi căm hờn. Hồ Chí Minh, người đi khắp năm châu lòng tin mặt trời chân lý sáng soi, dọi chiếu sáng dân mình. Hồ Chí Minh, Hồ Chí Minh, Hồ Chí Minh, Hồ Chí Minh. Miền biển xa, người đi khắp phương trời, ở nơi xa đó người dân đói nghèo, từ đau thương người đi khắp năm châu lòng tin mặt trời chân lý sáng soi, rồi chiếu sáng dân mình. Hồ Chí Minh, Hồ Chí Minh, Hồ Chí Minh. Vượt trùng sông, người đi khắp phương trời, luyện tôi ý chí lòng núi căm hờn. Hồ Chí Minh, người đi khắp năm châu lòng tin mặt trời chân lý sáng soi, dọi chiếu sáng dân mình. Hồ Chí Minh, Hồ Chí Minh, Hồ Chí Minh, Hồ Chí Minh. Miền biển Đông, sao tắt nơi chân trời, ở nơi xa đó người dân đói nghèo, từ đau thương người đi khắp năm châu lòng tin mặt trời chân lý sáng soi, dọi chiếu sáng dân mình. Hồ Chí Minh,